Yes, I've seen them all. Sure, they're big and good dogs too, but it makes no difference. I don't care if your dogs are no bigger than a snuff can. They still have a chance. Now, which one are you going to enter? I couldn't decide. I said, I'll think it over tonight and let you know tomorrow. The next morning when I stepped outside the tent, I saw men everywhere. They were combing and brushing their dogs and getting them pruned for the beauty contest. Beautiful combs and brushes were used to brush expensive oils into their glossy hair. Going over to my dogs, I stood and looked at them. I started to untie old Dan, but taking a closer look at him, I could see he would never win a beauty contest. His face and ears were massive old scars caused from the many fights with tough old coons and bobcats. He held his head in my hands and I held his head in my hands and felt sorry for him, but I loved him that much more. I looked at little Anne over and couldn't see any scars. I laughed because I knew why. She was too smart to walk right up in the face of a fight. She would wait until old Dan took hold and then dart in. I untied her rope and walked her over to our tent. My father and grandfather were gone. No doubt they were over in some tent visiting old friends and making new ones. Looking around to find something I could use to groom my dog, I saw Grandpa's open suitcase. There right on top was the very thing I needed. This beautiful bone-handled hairbrush and his ivory cone. Picking them up, I turned them over in my hand. Little Anne stood looking at me. Impulsively, I reached down and raked her from shoulder to hip with the brush. She seemed to like it. I knew I shouldn't do it, but I decided to use them. Knowing I had no oils, I got some butter from our grocery box. With the homemade butter and Grandpa's hair set, I brushed her until she shone. All the time I was grooming her, she tried to lick the butter from my hands. The job completed, I stepped back and inspected her. I was surprised at the change. Her short red hair glistened and every one was in perfect place. Shaking my finger at her, I said, "If you lay down and roll, I'll wear you out," although I knew I wouldn't. Hearing a lot of movement outside, I looked out. Men were setting their dogs on a long table which had been built in the center of the campground. Leading little Anne to it, I picked her up and set her on the table too. I told her to act like a lady. She wagged her tail as though she understood. I untied the rope and stepped back. After the dogs were all lined up, the judging started. Four judges walked around and around the table, looking at them from all angles. When one of them would point at a hound, he was taken down and eliminated from the contest. Dog after dog was disqualified. Little Anne was still on the table. My eyes were wide, my throat dry, and my heart thumping. One judge stopped in front of little Anne. My heart stopped too. Reaching over, he patted her on the head. Turning to me, he asked, "Is this your dog?" I couldn't speak. I just nodded my head. He said, "She's a beautiful hound." I walked on down the line. My heart started beating again. There were 8 dogs left. Little Anne was still holding her own. Then there were 4. I was ready to cry. 2 more were taken down. Little Anne and a big walker hound owned by a Mr. Kyle were the only ones left. The judges couldn't seem to make up their minds. Everyone started shouting, "Walk them! Walk them!" I didn't know what they meant. Mr. Kyle and I were told to go to one end of the table. Our dogs were placed at the other end. Mr. Kyle snapped his fingers and called to his dog. The big hound started walking towards his master. What a beautiful sight it was. He walked like a king. His body was stiff and straight, his head high in the air, his large muscles quivered and jerked under his glossy coat, but something went wrong. Just before he reached the end, he broke his stride, turned, and jumped down from the table. A low murmur ran through the crowd. It was my turn. 3 times I tried to call to little Anne. Words wouldn't come out. My throat was too dry. My vocals refused to work, chords refused to work, but I could snap my fingers. That was all I needed. She started towards me. I held my breath. There was silence all around me. as graceful as any queen, with her head high in the air and her long red tail arched in a perfect rainbow. My little dog walked straight at me. On she came. Walking up to me, she laid her head on my shoulder. As I put my arms around her, the crowd exploded. During the commotion, I felt hands slapping me on the back, and I heard the word congratulations time after time. The head judge came over and made a speech. Handing me a small silver cup, he said, "Congratulations, son, it was justly won." The tears came rolling. I gathered my dog up in my arms and walked to our tent. Grandpa followed, proudly carrying the cup. That evening the head judge stepped up on the table. He held a small box in his hand. He shouted, "Over here, men! I have some announcements to make." We all gathered round. In a loud voice he said, "Gentlemen, the contest will start tonight. I'm sure most of you men have been in these hunts before, but for those of you who haven't, I will explain the rules. Each night, 5 sets of dogs will be taken out to hunt. A judge will go along with each pair of hounds. Every morning, the judge will turn in that night's catch. The 2 hounds that tree the most coons will qualify for the championship runoff. The other 4 sets will be eliminated from the hunt. Of course, if there is a tie, both sets will qualify. On the following nights, only those hounds tying the first night's score or getting more will be in the runoff. Now, gentlemen, this hunt must be carried out in a sportsmanlike way. If the coon is treed where he can't be caught, such as in a bluff, it will not be counted. You must catch the coon, skin it, and turn the hide over to your judge. You are allowed to take an axe, a lantern, and a gun with birdshot, which you can use to get a coon out of a tree. 25 sets of hound have entered in the hunt. In this box I have 25 cards. Everyone in the contest will now line up for the drawing. The card you draw will tell what night your hounds are to hunt. Walking along in the line, I noticed the beautiful red coats of the caps and the soft leather boots worn by other hunters. I felt out of place in my faded blue overalls, old sheepskin coat, and scuffed and worn shoes, but to the wonderful men it made no difference. They treated me like a man, and even talked to me like a man. When it came my time to draw, my hand was shaking so hard I could hardly get it in the box. Pulling the card out, I saw I had drawn the 4th night. After the hunters had left, we stood around our campfire sipping strong black coffee and listening to the baying of the hounds. Time after time we heard the tree bark. Once 2 hounds came close to the camp, hot on a trail. We listened to their steady bawling. All at once they stopped. After several minutes of waiting, a hunter said, "You know what? That old coon took to the river and in some way has fooled those dogs." Another one said, "Yes, sir, he sure has." A friendly hunter looked at me and asked, "Do you think he could have fooled your dogs?" Thinking this question over, I said, "You know, sometimes when I'm hunting way back in the mountains or down on the river, I sing a little song I made up for myself. One of the verses goes like this: You can swim the river, old Mr. Ringtail, and play your tricks out one by one. It won't do any good, old Ming, Mr. Ringtail. My little land knows every one." The hunters roared with laughter. Some slapped me on the back. Tired and sleepy, but with a smile on my face, I went off to bed. The next morning, two blue tick hounds from the Smoky Mountains of Tennessee came out in the lead with 3 big coons to their credit. The other 4 sets were eliminated. The following morning, all 5 sets of dogs were eliminated. None had even tied the blue ticks, although 2 sets had gotten 2 coons, and one of these had treed a 3rd one in a bluff. That day, while eating dinner, my grandfather asked me if my dogs had ever treed 3 coons in one night. I said, "Yes, 4 different times, but that's all." "Where do you think we should hunt on our night?" Papa asked. I told him if we could get our judge to go with us in the buggy, we would be better off if we could go far down river and get out the range where the other dogs had hunted. He said, "That's a good idea. I'll go to see the judges about it." While I was washing the dishes, Grandpa said, "I think I'll shave." I should have left the tent then, but I wasn't done with my dishwashing. With a pin, Grandpa hung a small mirror on the tent wall. After much snorting, mumbling, and screwing of his face this way and that, the job was completed. Dabbing a little water on his iron gray hair, he reached for the brush and comb. From the corner of my eye, I watched him. I tried to clean the beautiful brush, but hadn't been able to get all the short red hair from it. With 2 fingers, Grandpa pulled some of the hair from the bristles. Holding it in front of him, he looked over carefully. Then, bending over close to the mirror, peeking over his glasses, he inspected his head. Straightening up, he looked at the brush again. Turned around quickly, he looked straight at me and said, "Say, young, not waiting for any more," I scooted for the door. Crawling under the buggy, I lay down between my dogs. I knew he wouldn't be mad at me, but it would be best to stay away for a while. The third night, the blue ticks were tied by 2 black and tan hounds from the bayou country of Louisiana. All that day I was restless. I prowled through the camp. Every little while I would go and see how old Dan and little Ann were. Once I took 2 weenies from our groceries. I heated them and gave them to my dogs for a treat. Old Dan swallowed his down in one gulp and looked at me as if to say, "Is that all?" Little Ann ate hers in a ladylike way. I could have sworn I saw a small grin on her face. Grandpa was hopping around like a grasshopper, going here and there. Once passing a tent, I heard his voice. I knew he was bragging about my dogs. I smiled to myself. Another hunter stopped me and asked, "Is it true that your hounds have treed 6 coons in one night, 3 up in one tree, or is that old man just blowing off steam?" I told my grandfather had a little steam, but he was the best grandpa a boy ever had. He patted me on the head, turned, and walked away, laughing. To be continued.